Hey folks, welcome to the first episode in my Unreal Engine tutorial devlog series. As I mentioned in the introduction, the very first episode we're going to cover project creation and the few things I like to do when setting up a fresh project. So as you can see, we have the Epic Launcher here in front of us. We're in the Unreal Engine section. If we go over to our library tab, you can see right here I've got it filtered. I have a mess of projects for various different things. I've just done that to, well, to be honest, hide them. With that though, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to click on Launch up in our engine version. Now in this case I'm using 5.42. However, you may be able to follow along, you can follow along with any version you want. There may just be a couple of minor changes in the syntax or some of the locations of things. But with that, okay, once this actually opens up, all right, so with that, I run on a triple monitor setup and windows open up in all different places. So anyways, once you have ran that, it's going to open up here. You're going to see it has the project window. These are the current projects I have in 5.4. I have some older projects I haven't updated yet. These are all ones that I have previously worked on. The remains and what remains, that's actually previous attempts for this project. What remains was the last attempt that I just started before I thought, okay, I'm going to step back and actually, do this tutorial series. So anyway, so with that, you're going to click over on the Games tab. Now, one thing I want to point out is, so you're going to do just a quirk I found with this. So you think, oh, I'm going to do a first person. Let's want to do C# and we want to make it scalable. And then you go, actually, no, I want to make it third person. You notice it's kept the scalable, but it's defaulted back to a blueprint project. Personally, I don't like that. That's just me, though. I work in C++ wherever possible. So anyways, so with my particular project, I am looking at doing a first person. It's actually a first person survival game. Yes, there's 100 of them on the internet, all over the place. You can find them wherever you want. It's just what I want to make. Do I ever plan on releasing it? No. But anyways, so I want to make a first person game. However, I want to use what they call, and you can't see me doing air quotes here, but true first person. That's where you can see your feet and stuff. So what I'm actually going to start with is the third person template. And as I mentioned, we want to make it C++. We're going to give it a name. And in this case, I'm going to call this attempt The Fall. Project name. This really has no huge impact. You will hear a lot of things out there with games that they get a project name that is a code name that they use for a project. Really, that's this. The Fall, call it whatever you want, and you can change that within the settings for the editor so that when you actually finally build and release, you can have it present as something entirely different. But anyway, so we're going to call it that. We're going to click Create. Now, what this does is this creates, obviously, all the default content the same as if you had created a blueprint project. However, it also creates all of the C++ files and the associated Visual Studio solution and all the compilation code that's needed as well. This can take some time depending on the system you're working from. And with that, I'm going to pause things here and I will be back once this is done loading. All right, folks, so we are back in the editor here. Now, one thing I'll point out straight away, and this is just because it's how I work on my system, I have scalability set to medium. The reason for that is just literally I prefer to have things toned down while I'm doing code work and everything where I'm not worried about visuals. Once you get to a point when you're worried about visuals, then you can go through and change your scalability. So, anyways, as I was mentioning, we've got the project set up. The editor opens by default, and Visual Studio also gets opened. Now in here, this is the initial stuff that gets set up with all of the project files. I'm not worried about this right now. We're just going to close out of that. So the first few things I like to do with code cleanup, let me bring the content browser into the main window here. So we're going to go into the root content folder. Let me just open this up a bit so we can see it a little easier. You can see we have 3 different folders: the character, level prototyping, and third person. These are the files that, well, files and folders that are created by default with the project. So what I like to do is I like to just move everything into the third person folder. The whole reason for this is that keeps our folders and files organized. And I know straight away everything in the third person folder comes from the third person template when you set it up. Now, you're going to find after you've done your first move, the one folder, characters, has moved over, but level prototyping is in 2 places. It's both in the third person and here. The reason for that is redirectors. Now, they changed this slightly with Unreal 5.4, but if you right click on your content folder and go update redirector references. Now, this used to be something called fix up redirectors, and this never happened. It just did it all for you. What you want to do is now delete unreferenced redirectors, and then you can just simply delete that folder. So that's the first of 3 things to do with initial project setup that I do. The next thing, let's get this out of the way. The next thing I like to do is my plugins. So editor, go to edit, plugins. This opened up and off on a different screen. So by default, the editor comes with a bunch of plugins that Epic think you might need. Most of them are very valid for a lot of projects. However, if you're making a single player game, if you're only targeting, say, Windows, there's a lot of plugins you don't need. So the first thing I like to do is clean those up. I start with my third-party plugins that I have acquired from the marketplace. Some of these are free, some I've paid for. The first one I always add is the Visual Studio integration tools. It's a free one. If you don't use Visual Studio, it's not worth anything to you, so I wouldn't worry about that. The rest of these I'm not going to worry about for now. And then the other thing you want to do is one of the built-in ones. So this is where you're going to spend a lot of time, and I take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to go through that. You're going to go through and start removing things you don't need. Like, okay, well, I don't need Paper 2D. I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need... I want the AI stuff, analytics, Android. Here we go. Here's another one. I have 0 intent on doing anything for Android, so I can get rid of that. Here's a dependency. Plugin is required for online subsystem Google Play. Well, we're not using Google, so we can disable that as well. Rinse and repeat. Now, I'm not going to show you every single plugin I enable and disable because they are very specific to the project you are working on. With that, I'm going to pause the recording and I will be back as soon as I'm done dealing with my plugins. Alright, so I've got all my plugins cleaned up. Now, if you notice, I'm sitting on the source control plugins. So for myself, I use GitHub. I'm not going to go through and cover setting up source control. There is other videos on that on the internet. You can find a lot of that information on YouTube, and it's going to be down to your personal preference as to which source control you use. Up until recently, I actually used Perforce. I have my own Perforce setup, but I've found just because I do like to do a lot of remote development, like if I'm on the road, I didn't want to expose my local Perforce server to the internet, so I just use Git. They already have everything in place. So anyways, now that all your plugins are done, you're going to notice down here you've got You must restart Unreal Editor for your changes to take effect, and a button for restart now. We're not going to press that. I'm actually going to close out of the plugins tab for now, and we're going to go back to the content browser. We're going to cover the third part of the cleanup process before we get into any code work, and then we'll end up this episode. So if you open up your C++ classes folder and then your project, you're going to notice you have two classes and no folder structure within there. You have the fall character in this case and the game mode. So this is your player character and your default game mode. What we want to do, now this first step is actually particularly specific to my project. It may be to yours as well. But the first thing we're going to want to do is create a derived character class. So you're going to right click, new C++ class, character, and click next. Pick your class type as public. Now in your folder path, actually, this is again personal preference, but I put these in a folder base class. And what I'm going to call this is, instead of my character, it's going to be called TF character, or the fall character. I'm going to create that class. It's going to open up Visual Studio, and in a moment it's going to throw up a little pop-up, do you want to reload the project? Here we go. So you click reload, and you'll notice off here on the left it's now added some folders or filters. The other thing it's done is it started the Unreal live coding. What this is the editor trying to, at runtime, pull in some code changes you've made. The reason for this is just to try and keep it up to date for all of the stuff. Not always the most useful, but it has its purposes. So now that that's done, you can see we now have the public folder and the base class folder. We're going to open that up. And you can see we have the TF character. So I'm going to select that, right click, create a C++ class derived from TF character. We're going to leave the folder path as it is, but what we're going to do is change this to TF player character. And we're going to create that class. Again, Visual Studio will ask you to reload, and you're also going to have the live coding run. Now let me pull that back up. You can see this goes through pretty quickly. Again, this may change from system to system. Mine runs pretty fast when I have things like my Windows Defender not set to run real-time scanning. But anyways, now we've done that, we can actually close out of the editor. So I'm going to move the, when this actually responds, because it's still doing some, there we go. So move that over. We're going to close out of the editor. We're done for now. So, all right, and then the live coding window closes down. So you're going to see here in Visual Studio or your IDE of choice, it's created the player character and the character classes. So the first thing we want to do, and let's organize, well, we actually don't want to do anything with TF character right now, so we're going to close out of that. We're going to open what was one of the default classes, in this case your player character, the fall character. We're going to open the header and source file, and just for ease I'm going to move these around so they're next to each other. So at this point it's really simple. It is just copy and paste. So we're going to start, copy these, bring them over into here. We don't need this include because we're not using this logging. I found it doesn't really serve any purpose, at least with 5.4. It may have served purpose in previous iterations of the engine, but we don't really need that for here. We're going to go copy that config equals game and copy this. Now this is just a personal preference, you don't need to do this, but I do prefer to have private actually visibly defined. I do understand that by default anything declared here is considered private, but I like, for the sake of code clarity, I do like to actually specifically have that in there to say my intentions are for these to be private. It just helps if anyone else is going to be looking at your code at any point. Yes, you may think I'm going to be a solo dev, I'm the only one who's ever going to work on it, but who's to say you're not 2 years down the line, you actually have a successful, say, Kickstarter, because your project got somewhere, and you have to think about bringing in some other people to help out. It's always good to think about those sort of things from the start. Now, if you are 100% just doing a throwaway project, that's fine. You don't need to. However, if you think there is even the smallest chance this is something that might go somewhere, I highly recommend, right from the start, think about it properly. Anyways, so let's finish copying and pasting these. Another personal preference of mine is I prefer to have private, protected, public. So we're just going to grab all of this. And there is one thing in there that always annoys me. We have protected in here twice, which we don't need. So I'm going to get rid of that. Save. And you'll notice throughout the series, I save a lot and I build a lot. Personal preference, I've had a lot of incidents in the past where I haven't done that, and I've ended up losing some work because of it. So anyways, so the one thing you'll notice we didn't copy over was the constructor. Really simple. It's because we can't copy that over. It's not going to work. So we're just going to create our new one, our own constructor, and throw it down here in the public section. All right, and you're going to notice IntelliSense throws a bunch of warnings, or not even warnings, but informative bits of information. It's because we don't have a definition. The way I do this, because I'm not using any fancy plugins, quick action or refactoring, create definition, simple as that. And we actually don't need the original header file anymore, so we can close that out. And I'm just going to quickly go through and do that for all of these. Now, one thing I'll actually point out while I do this is you'll have noticed with a lot of the original or initial setup, I paused the video and came back when things were done. Here, I'm doing some very simple, just repetitive tasks. The reason I'm not cutting these out is I want everyone to see exactly what I'm doing, the mistakes I'm making, any fixes I need to do, because these are things you're going to run into as well, or potentially run into, I should say. And with that, I want to make sure I'm not making myself out to be some super developer that, oh, there was this problem that I cut out from the video because I didn't want to look like an idiot. I will be honest with you, I make mistakes in my day job as a programmer, and I have to debug and figure out what's going on. And honestly, for myself, I have found the debugging skill is one of the hardest things for people to learn. So I'm going to be including all of that as I go. Anyways, so now we've got all those definitions created. We actually don't need this header file right now either. So we're going to close out of that. We're going to save the source file. And now we're going to start copying this stuff over. So we're going to start with the constructor. I'm going to just pull down to here. And you'll notice what I've done is I've been removing comments as I go. A lot of this is comments I personally don't want. But anyways, so again, right away, did our first copy paste into the source file. We're having a ton of IntelliSense errors thrown. Pointer or reference to an incomplete type uCapsule component is not allowed. The reason for that is we're missing our includes. You can see up here we just have the header file, but if we go into the original one, we have a bunch of other ones. So we need to copy that. We don't need to copy this define log category, log template character. We don't need that. That's the logging I mentioned we're not using. So we're going to copy all of this. You don't need to include the very first header file for the original character. We're going to paste that in here, and you're going to see all of these IntelliSense errors go away. All right, so I'm going to quickly clean these comments up, and I'll explain a bit on this while I'm doing it. So the reason why I don't leave any of these original epic comments in there is simply because it's not my code. I don't need to add the comments, and these are the default templates. Everything in here should be relatively self-explanatory to anyone looking at the code. So just for example, we're getting the capsule component, we're initializing its size to 42 by 96. We're setting, and these are things you do within the editor. So like use controller rotation, pitch, yaw, and roll. It's a checkbox in the editor. So a lot of this, I'm not concerned about the comments. Everyone's going to know what this does. Anyways, so the next one, we're done with the constructor. Begin play is a real simple one here. However, we'll be expanding that once we get further into the series. All right. And then setup player input. So this is the one where the logging is. And just to quickly cover why I don't think we need to include that, or I don't include that. If you want to, feel free. However, I personally don't include this simply because this is just saying the enhanced input component didn't work. Well, if this isn't working, something else much deeper is happening, and you got other problems to worry about. Personal preference. Keep it if you want. But I just grabbed this portion here, copy this over, and now you're going to notice there's two IntelliSense errors. Again, this is just because we're referencing a function in a different class. So we just need to fix that and change these here to reference this class. And lo and behold, those errors go away. So let's get rid of these comments. All right, and then we've got look and move left. So let's do that. Move. And look. So we've got those copied over. Let's clear the comments quickly. And just clean up those white space. Again, so anyone who understands C++ knows the white space at a code level isn't a concern. The compiler just ignores it. But when you're reading over the code and you have these like multiple empty lines, it just doesn't look nice. So again, personal preference. It's something I recommend. Try to keep clean code at all times. So now that we've got that copied over, we're just going to right click on the project. We are going to build. Now, because we built this, well, this is the first time we're building it through the IDE, it can take a moment. In my case, it built really quick. I don't have the best system when it comes to that, but my hardware is built around programming. It's what I do for a profession. So now that's done, we are actually going to go back into the editor. Let me just get that opened up here. Now you have two ways to go about this. You can open it up by running it in local debugger through Visual Studio or your IDE of choice, or you can launch it through the Epic Launcher. Personally, it varies depending on what you're doing as to which is going to be the best option. In this case, I'm running it through the Epic Launcher just because I don't want to have to close the editor down for debugging, things like that. And for whatever reason, I'm going to have to figure this out. The editor does not like the fact I'm running in a 3800 screen. Editor preferences. Let's see if that's in here. So these are the sort of things I'm going to be including in the videos as I go. I stumble into a problem, I will include fixing said problem or trying to. Application scaling. Let's try changing that to a 2. Whoa, that's big. Let's go 1.25. Because the problem is this also affects my other monitors. Okay, that's not too bad, but this is really bad. So 1.25. Yeah, 1.45. Yeah, that works. I just have to deal with it in my other monitors. So, all right, we'll close that out. learn something new every day. I didn't realize they actually gave us the option to edit the theme. But anyway, so back into the editor. We're going. So right here, this is the portion of the video I needed to re-record and modify based on the original episode's bad information. In the original episode, I say we need to go through and reparent the third-person blueprint. Let me just bring that over. I go through the description and the steps to reparent the third-person blueprint to our new player character class, and that was actually incorrect. That has actually caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. In here, we reparent that to... this is a test, a quick project I set up for this. We set it to the TF player character. You do not want to do that. What we need to do here is we need to recreate a brand new blueprint based off of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select our third person blueprint. I'm going to hit F2. I'm going to put old underscore BP third person blueprint. But what we're going to do now is right click, new blueprint class, all classes, TFR in this case, player character, but we find our player character object class. I'm going to select that, and BP underscore third person character. Because the redirector, I'm going to put N underscore for new. I'm going to save this quickly. Right click, update redirector references, and see if that allows us to rename it. That's that already exists at this location with the name. No, okay. Right click. Where is it? Okay, well, I'm going to sort this out in a moment here. We're going to open up our both blueprints. I'm going to move these over. And the reason being for that is we want to copy information from one to the other. So in the original one, what we're going to do is we're going to start with our character mesh. I'm going to pull my details panel over here. We're going to select our mannequin. Actually, I'm going to get the content browser out of the way. But if you click the folder with a magnifying glass, what it's going to do is it's going to find that asset in your content browser. We go back to our new one. We're going to select the mesh. We're going to push that there. And you can see it's now in a weird position. So we're going to go back to our original. Right click on the transform. Copy all properties in this category or in category. Do the same thing. Right to the new one. Right click. Paste all properties. And you can see the mannequin moves to the correct place. Now, we do also have a missing animation blueprint. So in here, animation mode, anim class, select that. Once it selects it in the content browser, we're going to paste that in there, and you can see our character has moved, is now animated. Now the big one, and when I was talking people through fixing this problem, this was the big issue a lot of people had, is the inputs weren't working. So your move, jump, things like that. What you want to do, select your root of your blueprint in the components outline. In your details, put input. And you're going to see you have default mapping, jump, move, look. Do the same thing over on your original character. Select the root. We're going to put input. And it's going to find all of these. So input mapping context, you're going to select that. We're going to transfer that over. And then you only really need to select one of these because they're all located in the same folder. I'm going to select jump. And I'll actually pull this over to show you guys. You can see they're all three of them are in there. So all I'm going to be doing is selecting the relevant one and putting it in here. So we have jump selected. I'm going to select move. And I'm going to select look. We're going to compile and save this. Now, going to close out of these blueprint windows. I'm going to go back to our content browser and back to our blueprints folder. So in here, what we need to do is you're going to see down here there's one unsaved, and that's referencing the BP third person character. It's actually what was causing my rename issue. So we're going to save selected. We're going to drag this back over. We're going to delete the old. And then we should be able to rename the new one. So now this is going to cause the editor to, if you're running from the editor, found circular redirect from whatever. We're just going to hit continue on this one because we're done with this at that point. And this, literally, that's all you need to do there. Close down your editor, relaunch the editor, and everything will be good. So again, I apologize to anyone who's watched this episode and followed through with my initial bad direction on reparenting. I thought it would work, honestly. It wasn't until much later in the series that this broke. So anyways, I'm going to return you back to the original episode, and I will have cut out the portion about the reparenting and inserted this part in there. So again, my apologies, and enjoy the series. Move this content browser out of the way. Now, this is the first time I'm going to be running in the editor, so this may take a moment for it to clarify itself and not be janky. But no, it works straight away. So let's just make sure everything still works. So yeah, we have our character running off of the custom class we just created. Now I understand there's nothing fancy there, but still, with that, I'm actually going to end this first episode here. We've done the initial project cleanup that I wanted to do and all of the original setup. Next episode, we're actually going to start on our stat line. That's your health, stamina, things like that. So with that, folks, I'm glad you've made it this far. I hope you enjoyed. Standard, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode.